I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath. Can you smell the faint, earthy scent of fresh tatami mats, mixed with the smoky aroma of a mosquito coil burning on the porch? Can you hear the distant, heavy clatter of wooden clogs echoing down a narrow alleyway in the evening? If these sensations stir a sudden, achingu warmth in your chest, then you are exactly where you need to be. Today, we are going to travel back together to a very special time and place. We are journeying back to Japan of our youth, to the 1970s and 1980s. We are going to dust off 20 everyday habits and beautiful rituals that were entirely normal to us back then, but which might seem a tarduat at the modern world today. These was the little things that quietly built the rhythm of our lives. And I promise you, by the time we reach our final memory, the one involving the smell of dark ink on a cold winter morning, you will remember exactly what it felt like to hold time itself in the palm of your hand. Before we begin our journey, let us pause and remember how time felt back then. Time simply moved slower. It possessed a weight, a texture, a deliberate rhythm that we seem to have completely lost today. In our modern age of instant messaging and overnight deliveries, people often mistakenly believe that because we lacked advanced technology, our lives were somehow poorer or emptier. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life was infinitely richer because it required our patience. Everything demanded our physical presence and our sincere effort. We had to wait days for a photograph to develop, never knowing if we captured the smile perfectly. We had to walk down to the neighborhood store to hear the local news. We had to write our feelings down on paper, seal them in an envelope, and trust the postman to deliver our hearts across the country. That waiting, that beautiful anticipation, created a space where genuine human connection could deeply take root. We were not isolated behind glowing glass screens. We lived out loud, bumping shoulders on crowded trains, shivering together under winter blankets, and sharing our lives face to face. Let us remember how rich that simple world truly was. Let us begin by remembering a small wooden clipboard that used to travel from house to house in our neighborhoods. Do you remember the kairanban, the neighborhood circular? In the 1970s and 1980s, this was our most reliable form of local communication. The head of the neighborhood association would start the chain, and this worn board, kabadoin local notice, would be physically handled from neighbor to neighbor. You would hear a port light call at your entry, the familiar voice of Mrs. Sato from next door. You would step down to the genkan, exchange polite greetings, and perhaps chat about the changing weather or the children's schooling for a few precious minutes. Then came the most satisfying part. You would take your family hanko, the personal seal, press it firmly into the red ink pad, and stamp your name on the routing sheet to prove you had read the notices. It was not just about sharing information regarding trash collection days or local festivals. It was a physical thread that wove the community together. That small interaction at the front door forced us to look each other in the eye, to check in on our elders, and to feel deeply rooted in our street. Today, a quick group message on a smartphone has replaced this, but it can never replace the warmth of a neighbor's smile at your door. And speaking of our front doors, do you recall the sturdy wooden box nailed right beside the entryway? Early in the morning, before the sun had even fully risen, the absolute silence of the street would be broken by a comforting, musical sound. It was the rhythmic clinking of heavy glass bottles as the milkman made his daily deliveries. You would open your front door, feeling the crisp morning air, and reach into that wooden milk box. Inside sat those beautiful, thick glass bottles covered in condensation. But the best part was opening them. The bottles were sealed with a sturdy paper cap, tightly fitted into the rim. You had to use a special, sharp little needle tool that the milk company provided, just to pry that cardboard lid off. If you were careful, you would not spill a drop. And the taste of that first sip was incredible, especially because the richest, thickest cream always floated right at the top, clinging to the underside of the paper cap. We would leave the empty, rinsed bottles back in the box the next morning, to be collected, washed, and reused. It was a beautiful, sustainable cycle built entirely on local trust, long before anyone used the word recycling. That simple glass bottle held the pure, innocent taste of our childhood mornings. Let us step back inside the house and look at the hallway. Sitting proudly on a small table was the undisputed king of our home communication, the heavy, imposing kurodenwa, or the black rotary phone. Do you remember how solid and permanent it felt? This was not something you could slip into your pocket. It was a piece of furniture, often lovingly draped in an intricate, handmade white lace cover by your mothers to protect it from dust. Making a phone call was a deliberate physical act. You had to place your finger in the hole of the heavy plastic dial, put it all the way around to the metal stopper, and let go. The sound it made as it spun back into place, a rhythmic ticking noise, is permanently etched into our memories. And calling a friend in the 1970s was an exercise in pure bravery. You could not just message them directly. You had to dial their home number and pray that their strict father would not be the one answering the phone. If he did, you had to summon all your courage, use your most polite, honorific language, and respectfully ask if your friend was available to speak. The telephone tethered us to one spot in the house, making every conversation a public, shared event within the family. Now, let us imagine we are taking a journey. The absolute height of excitement was boarding the Shinkansen, the bullet train, for a family trip. But no train ride in the Showa era was complete without buying a very specific treat from the station kiosk. I am talking, of course, about Reito Mikan, the frozen mandarin oranges. They always came packaged in a bright red synthetic net bag, usually sold in sets of 3 or 4. When you first bought them, they were as hard as rocks and covered in a beautiful, glittering layer of white frost. The ritual was not just about eating them, it was about the exquisite torture of waiting. You would hold the freezing fruit in your warm hands, feeling the cold seep into your palms, gently rolling it back and forth to speed up the thawing process. The skin would turn a darker, wet orange as the frost melted away. Finally, when it was just soft enough, you would peel it. The inside was a magical texture, partially frozen, icy, and incredibly sweet. It was the perfect, refreshing treat in the days when the air conditioning on trains was not nearly as powerful as it is today. That red net bag swinging from your wrist was the universal symbol that a grand family adventure had officially begun. Let us wander down the street to the place where all our pocket money disappeared. The local dagashiya, the neighborhood penny candy store. Today, convenience stores are brightly lit and spotless, but the dagashiya was completely different. It was wonderfully dim, smelling of sweet kinako powder, old cardboard, and soy sauce. It was usually run by an elderly woman, the beloved neighborhood grandmother, who sat patiently behind the counter, watching us debate our purchases. We would walk in clutching a few heavy bronze 10-yen coins in our sweaty palms, feeling like wealthy merchants. Everything was meant to be affordable. We would buy small, artificially brightly colored candies, dried squid on a stick, or those little boxes of whistle candy that made a terrible noise before you ate them. The greatest thrill was the games of chance. We would pay our coins to pralandam string hunting from a board, hoping it was attached to the largest piece of candy, to the warsums end up with the smallest prize. The dagashiya was our first real school of economics. We learned how to budget, how to make agonizing choices, and how to interact with the adults in our community. It was a magical, dusty little paradise built entirely for children. There's one particular atmosphere from the 1970s and 80s that is absolutely unimaginable today. It was the constant, omnipresent haze of cigarette smoke. Today, smoking is highly restricted, but back then, it was simply everywhere. We would board the local train or the Shinkansen, and practically every car was a smoking car. You could barely see across the aisle through the thick blue cloud. Office desks were not complete without a large, heavy glass ashtray overflowing with crushed butts by 3 p.m. Even the armrests in hospital waiting rooms and movie theaters had tiny metal ashtrays built right into them. The distinctive smell of popular brands like Peace or 7 Stars was woven into the very fabric of adult life. You would constantly hear the metallic clink of a Zippo lighter or the scratch of a match during any business meeting or family dinner. Buying cigarettes was just as easy. Teenagers were often sent to the local tobacco shop by their fathers to pick up a carton, and no one batted an eye. While we certainly do not miss the health hazards of that era, that specific, smoky scent and the rattling sound of lighters are inextricably linked to our memories of how the adult world operated back then. Let us move to the quiet hours of the night. Do you remember what it was like to be a teenager, sitting alone in your room late at night, supposedly studying for exams? In reality, our attention was completely focused on a small, rectangular box with a glowing dial. The Shinya Hoso, the midnight radio broadcasts, were our secret lifeline to the outside world. Long before the internet, these radio personalities were our closest confidants. We would listen with the volume turned down incredibly low, or perhaps with a single, uncomfortable plastic earpiece pressed into one ear, terrified of waking our parents. The room was dark, except for the warm orange glow of the radio tuner. We would spend hours meticulously writing postcards with colorful pens, sharing our teenage anxieties, our school crushes, and our silly jokes, begging the radio host to read them on air. Hearing your own name broadcast out into the dark night across millions of homes felt like absolute magic. It was a profound, shared intimacy. Millions of us were sitting alone in the dark, laughing at the same jokes, listening to the same records spinning, feeling profoundly connected through the invisible radio waves filling our quiet bedrooms. When the weekend finally arrived, the ultimate luxury was a family trip to the grand department stores in the city, and nothing symbolized the prosperity and elegance of the Babaru Eraku, Aitoraik, ji elevator girls, ji elevator garu, tua children, zemudoraik magical princess. Ze stando gracefully inside the gleaming elevator cabs, dressed in immaculate matching uniforms with pristine white gloves and perfectly styled hair. Their voices were a marvel, trained to speak in a wonderfully high, melodious pitch that cut through the noise of the busy store. They possessed a mechanical yet incredibly graceful precision. They would announce the contents of every floor with a beautiful sweeping gesture of their white-gloved hand and bow deeply to the customers entering and exiting. We would ride the elevator up and down just to watch them perform their duties. They elevated a simple mechanical function into a high-class ritual of customer service. Today, elevators are completely automated, and the elegant human touch has vanished from that small enclosed space. We lost not just an occupation, but a symbol of the meticulous care and the extravagant grace that defined Japan's most prosperous era. Let us recall a sound that defined our Sunday mornings. Long before everyone had electric tumble dryers, maintaining our bedding was a deeply physical, communal chore. Sunday was the day for futon tataki, beating the futon. As soon as the sun was shining brightly, mothers all across the neighborhood would drape the heavy cotton futons over the balcony rails. Then, a magnificent, echoing symphony would begin. Thwack, thwack, thwack. You could hear the rhythmic sound of bamboo and plastic beaters striking the thick cotton from every direction. It was hard, exhausting physical labor, carrying those heavy mattresses out to the sun, but it was absolutely necessary to keep them fluffy and free of dust. The most enduring memory of this chore is the smell. When you brought the futon back inside in the late afternoon and laid it down on the tatami mat, it possessed a deeply comforting, baked-in aroma. It smelled like warm sunshine, fresh air, and absolute cleanliness. Falling asleep that night on a freshly sun-baked futon, sinking into its expanded, fluffy depths, is one of the most incredibly comforting, tactile memories of our childhood. A comfort that no modern machine can ever truly replicate. And speaking of sensory memories, we must talk about the undisputed champion of the Japanese summer. When the humid nights grew thick and the loud buzzing of mosquitoes threatened our sleep, out came the katori senko, the mosquito coil. But it was not just the coil itself, it was the beloved ceramic pig, the kayari buta, that held it. Every household shimudo to have one of these charming, slightly comical ceramic ping sitting on the porch or near the slide screen doors. You would carefully sapellate the delicate green spirals, light the tip until it glowed a dull red, and hook it inside the pig. Then, that incredibly distinct, smoky, earthy aroma of pyrethrum would slowly fill the damp night air. It was a smell that instantly signaled the arrival of summer vacation. We would sit on the wooden veranda, eating cold watermelon, listening to the gentle ringing of a glass wind chime in the breeze, enveloped in that protective, nostalgic smoke. The coil would burn slowly through the night, leaving behind a delicate trail of gray ash by morning. That scent is so deeply ingrained in our souls that even today, a single whiff of a mosquito coil instantly transports us back to a summer evening 40 years ago. Now, let us bring to mind the meticulous, almost surgical process of creating the perfect cassette mixtape. In the 1980s, before digital playlists exist, compiling music was a tool labor. You would sit cross-legged in front of your heavy stereo system, waiting for your favorite song to play on the radio. Your fingers rested lightly on the play and record buttons, your heart racing. The moment the announcer stopped speaking, you pressed both buttons down with a satisfying mechanical clunk. You had to pray the radio host would not start talking before the song faded out completely. Then came the complex mathematics of the cassette tape itself. You had exactly 46 or perhaps 60 minutes to work with. You had to calculate the length of each track perfectly so that the music would not abruptly cut off when the tape reached the end of side A. We would carefully write the track list on the small cardboard insert with our neatest handwriting, often using colored pens to make it look special. Handing that plastic case to a friend, or perhaps to someone you secretly admired, was an incredibly vulnerable act. It was a handcrafted piece of your soul, a carefully curated message expressed through music. We did not just share songs, we gave away pieces of our time and our hearts. Let us step outside again and look for a bright pink object that used to be on every street corner. Before we carried smartphones in our pockets, our connection to the world relied entirely on the public payphone. Do you remember the sheer panic of the warning beep? You would be standing in the glass booth, which always smelled faintly of stale tobacco and old paper directories, talking to a loved one. Suddenly, you would hear that sharp, terrifying electronic beep, signaling that your money was running out. You have to fanclatic read into your pockets, pull ringing out heavy bronze 10 coins, and feed them into the slot as fast as you could to keep the connection alive. Watching the stack of coins rapidly drop into the machine, one by one, was incredibly stressful. Later on, the magical telephone card was introduced. But even then, watching the little hole punch it away at your lemminging units was a visual countdown of your conversation. We memorized the phone numbers of all our friends and family by heart. The payphone forced us to value our words, to get straight to the point, and to truly appreciate the precious, expensive minutes we had to speak with the people we cared about. As the days grew shorter and the autumn winds turned freezing cold, another iconic sound would echo through our neighborhoods. It was a deeply melancholic, drawn-out cry that sounded almost like a lament. Yakimo. It was the roasted sweet potato truck. You would hear that slow, hypnotic chant drifting through the twilight, accompanied by the smell of wood smoke and caramelized sugar. The moment we heard it, we would drop whatever we were doing, beg our mothers for some loose change, and sprint out into the cold street wearing only our indoor slippers. The vendor, an older man with a warm smile, would open the back of his small truck to reveal a magical, glowing bed of hot stones. He would expertly pull out a blackened, slightly charred sweet potato, wrap it carefully in a piece of old newspaper, and hand it to you. The potato was so incredibly hot that you had to juggle it between your hands as you walked back inside. Breaking it open revealed steam billowing into the cold air and the brightest, sweetest golden flesh imaginable. It was the ultimate winter street food, a fleeting moment of pure warmth and joy purchased directly from the back of a smoky truck. Let us talk about how we captured our memories. Photography in our youth was an exercise in extreme patience and faith. We used heavy mechanical film cameras. You would buy a roll of film, perhaps with 24 or 36 exposures. Every single press of the shutter button had financial consequences, so you never wasted a shot. You posed carefully, ensuring everyone was looking, and held your breath as the mechanism clicked. But the most agonizing part was the aftermath. You could not look at the back of the camera to see if the picture was good. You had to finish the entire roll, take it to the local camera shop, and wait. Sometimes we waited 3 days, sometimes a whole week, just to get the small paper envelope of printed photographs back. The anticipation as you walked home from the shop, opening the envelope to flip through the glossy prints, was immense. Only then would you discover that your father had blinked in the family portrait, or that a beautiful landscape was completely out of focus. But those imperfections made the photographs precious. They were physical, irreplaceable objects. The delayed gratification made the memories we captured feel profoundly more valuable and deeply cherished. Another sound that struck our Iri lives was the bright, cheerful blast of a small brass horn. Toteteto. In the late afternoon, as mothers begin. Preparing dinner, the local tofu seller would slowly pedal his customized bicycle or push his cart down the street. Hearing that distinct sound meant it was time to run out of the house. But you did not just bring money. You brought your own container. We would grab a plastic bowl or a shallow pot from the kitchen and hurry outside. The vendor would open the wooden lid of his cart, revealing large, pristine white blocks of tofu resting in cool, clear water. With absolute precision, he would use a flat metal spatula to gently scoop up a delicate block and slide it smoothly into your bowl, adding a splash of the cold water to keep it fresh. That tofu would go straight into the evening miso soup, or be served cold with ginger and soy sauce. It was a daily interaction built entirely on trust and routine. We knew the vendor's face, he knew our families, and the food we ate was physically handed to us by the person who made it just hours before. It was the very definition of a thriving, connected local community. Now, we must score an absurd reality of the 1980s bubble. Era that still boggles the mind today. I am talking about the morning commute, specifically the role of Ossia, the train pushers. As millions of people flooded into Tokyo and Osaka for work, the train stations became absolute battlegrounds. The trains would arrive already completely full, yet hundreds of people still needed to board. This is where the pushers stepped in. Station attendants wearing neat uniforms and those ubiquitous white gloves would physically place their hands on the backs of businessmen and literally shove them into the train cars. It was a bizarre display of polite violence. You would stand there, crushed against strangers, unable to move your arms, your face pressed against the cold glass of the door, while someone forcefully pushed you deeper into the carriage so the doors could slide shut. We accepted this daily crushing as entirely normal, a necessary sacrifice for the booming economy. To modernize, treating human beings like puzzle pieces to be hammered into a box seems completely absurd and terrifying. But for us, it was just another Tuesday morning on the way to the office. When we finally returned home from those exhausting commutes, our sanctuary awaited us in the center of the living room. Let us remember the heavy, comforting presence of the kotatsu. In those days, central heating was practically unheard of in our drafty homes. Instead, we relied entirely on the intense, localized heat of the kotatsu table. You would slip your cold feet under the heavy, quilted blanketo, feeling the immediate, glorious embrace of the red, glowing heater underneath. And what was a kotatsu without a woven basket overflowing with bright orange mikan? Peeling those mandarin oranges became a subconscious winter ritual. Your fingertips would turn slightly yellow from the fragrant oils of the peel. We would sit there for hours, shoulders shivering slightly in the chilly room, but our legs toasty and warm. Family members would inevitably bump knees under the table, sparking sleepy conversations or minor sibling squabbles. The trap of the kotatsu was legendary. You would become too comfortable to get up, often falling asleep right there on the tatami mat, only to be woken by a gentle scolding from your mother. That shared warmth, huddled together under a single blanket, created an unspoken physical closeness that naturally fostered emotional bonds within the family. While we were trapped under the kotatsu, our eyes were usually glued to a massive piece of wooden furniture in the corner of the room. The television set of our youth was not a flat, sleek screen. It was a heavy, deep box with a curved glass front and a large, plastic rotary dial on the side. Changing the channel required physical effort. You had to get up, walk over to the set, and turn the heavy dial with a loud, satisfying clunk. Clunk, clunk, clunk. And then there were the rabbit ear antennas sitting on top. Whenever the picture turned into a snowy, static mess, someone had to stand by the television, adjusting the metal rods, twisting them into strange angles until the picture magically cleared up. The moment they let go, the static would return, meaning the youngest child often had to stand there holding the antenna during the best part of the show. Because we only had one television and a handful of channels, the entire family watched the exact same programs. We watched the professional baseball games, the sprawling historical dramas, and the glittering music variety shows together. The television was not a personal device for isolation. It was the glowing hearth around which the entire family gathered every single night. Let us step outside one last time on a warm summer evening. There is a sound that perfectly captures the festive spirit of Showa-era summers, a sound that has almost entirely vanished from modern asphalt streets. It is the rhythmic wooden clatter of geta, the traditional wooden clogs. During the summer festivals, the Natsu Matsuri, everyone would dress in raitoe to cotton yukata. The final touch was slipping your bare feet into the geta. Walking in them required a specific, slightly chafing gait. As you walked down the street toward the glow of the paper lanterns, the wooden teeth of the clogs striking the pavement created a beautiful, chaotic percussion. Karankoron, karankoron. It was the soundtrack of excitement, of eating shave ice, catching grolder fish with fregible paper scoops, and watching the fireworks light up the humid sky. You could feel the rigid wood against your soles and the soft fabric sango bitu in your toes. Today, most people wear silent, comfortable sneakers even to festivals. We gained comfort, but we lost that distinct, echoing clatter that proudly announced to the enter. I never thought that Asama celebration had officially begun. Finally, we come to the most beautiful and deeply missed ritual of all. As December drew to a close, a quiet panic and a profound sense of duty would settle over the house. It was time to write the Nengajo, the New Year's greeting cards. We did not simply buy pre-printed cards or send digital messages. We sat on the tatami floor for hours, hunched over a low table, surrounded by the deep, earthy smell of black India ink. We used a brush pen to painstakingly write the addresses and personal greetings on dozens, sometimes hundreds of postcards. Your hand would cramp, Your fingers would be stained with black ink, and the floor would be covered with cards laid out carefully to dry. It was a massive undertaking, but it was essential. On the cold morning of January 1st, the postman would arrive with a thick, heavy bundle held together with a rubber band. Sitting around the table, reading those handwritten cards, seeing the unique handwriting of old classmates, distant relatives, and former colleagues was the true joy of the new year. You could feel the time and effort someone had held in their hands just to send you a thought. In that thick stack of paper, we held tangible proof that we were remembered, that we were loved, and that we belonged to a wider world. When we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes beautifully clear. We are not just mourning the loss of heavy wooden televisions, glass milk bottles, or black rotary phones. What we truly miss is the texture of our youth and the way time itself felt. We miss the physical weight of waiting, the mandatory patience that forced us to appreciate the moment, and the deep, inescapable connection we had with our neighbors and our families. These absurd habits from the 1970s and 80s were the invisible threads that tied our communities together. We lived in a world that we could touch, smell, and hear. Thank you so deeply for walking down this nostalgic street with me today. If this journey brought a warm smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps keep these precious memories alive. Now, I want to hear your voice. Which of these 20 habits sparked the strongest memory for you? Did you ever wait nervously by the black rotary phone? Or buy roasted sweet potatoes from a truck? Please, share your personal stories in the comments below. Let us build our own little community of shared memories right here. Until next time, take care, and never forget the beautiful history that lives in your heart.